Hi, my name is Vanessa Rodriguez, and 3 months ago I thought my sister Christina was just irresponsible with money. I had no idea she was a thief who would steal the most precious thing I owned while I was saving lives at the hospital. What started as a missing engagement ring ended with me holding the deed to her house while she sat in a police station, finally facing the consequences of a lifetime of taking what wasn't hers. Tonight, I'm not here to seek sympathy. I'm here to show you what happens when someone pushes the wrong person too far, and how sometimes the best revenge is simply letting the truth do all the work. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The October morning air in Denver carried that crisp bite that promised winter wasn't far behind. I remember pulling into the hospital parking garage at 5:30 in the morning, my travel mug steaming with coffee that would be my lifeline through another 12-hour shift in the ICU. The sapphire engagement ring on my left hand caught the fluorescent lights as I grabbed my badge from the console. The vintage stone Marcus had chosen specifically because it reminded him of my grandmother's eyes. It was the kind of ring that stopped conversations, not because of its size but because of its story. His grandmother had worn it for 63 years before passing it down to him with the instruction that it should only go to someone worth keeping forever. I twisted it slightly, a habit I'd developed since Marcus proposed 6 months earlier on the hiking trail, where we'd had our first real conversation about the future. The ring felt secure, familiar, like it had always belonged there. I locked my car and headed toward the elevator, already mentally preparing for what promised to be another intense day. Mrs. Henderson in room 4 was still on the ventilator, and the new admission from overnight had complications that would require careful monitoring. These were the thoughts that occupied my mind as I badged into the unit, completely unaware that 3 floors below, my sister Christina was texting someone about needing $5,000 by the end of the week. The shift started like any other report from the night nurse, medication rounds, family conferences that required delicate conversations about prognosis and hope. By noon, I was finally able to grab a quick lunch in the break room, scrolling through my phone while I ate a sandwich I'd packed at home. That's when I saw Christina's message in our family group chat, a photo of her at some trendy coffee shop downtown, with the caption, "Treating myself to a little shopping therapy." I rolled my eyes and kept scrolling. Christina's shopping therapy was legendary in our family, usually resulting in credit card bills she couldn't afford, and requests for loans that never seemed to get repaid. What I didn't know was that while I was checking on Mr. Garcia's blood pressure in room 7, Christina was using the spare key our mother had given her to let herself into my apartment. The key was supposed to be for emergencies, for times when I worked back-to-back shifts and needed someone to water my plants or pick up packages. It wasn't supposed to be for my sister to rummage through my jewelry box while I was saving lives across town. The afternoon flew by in the way hospital shifts do when every patient needs something different, and time becomes this elastic thing that stretches and compresses without warning. I didn't think about my ring again until I was washing my hands in the bathroom around 4 o'clock and my left hand felt strangely light. I looked down and felt my stomach drop straight through the floor. The ring was gone. Not loose, not shifted to another finger, gone. I stared at my bare finger for what felt like an hour but was probably only 30 seconds, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. I checked the soap dispenser, the floor around the sink, even the inside of my scrubs pockets, though I knew I hadn't put it there. Panic started creeping up my throat like ice water. This wasn't just any ring, this was Marcus's grandmother's ring, the one that came with stories about dancing at the VFW Hall in 1959, and raising 4 children through the lean years of the 60s. This was the ring I was supposed to pass down to my own children someday. I retraced every step of my shift, checking every room I'd been in, asking every colleague if they'd seen anything. The housekeeping staff helped me go through trash cans. Security reviewed the camera footage from the unit. Nothing. It was as if the ring had simply vanished into thin air. By the time my shift ended at 7:30, I was barely holding myself together. I called Marcus from the parking garage, my voice shaking as I explained what had happened. "Hey, these things happen," he said, though I could hear the tension underneath his calm tone. "We'll figure it out. Maybe it fell off at home and you just didn't notice." but I knew it hadn't fallen off at home. I remembered twisting it in the parking garage that morning, remembered the familiar weight of it during report. Someone had taken it, but the how and why made no sense. Hospital staff went through extensive background check. Patients in the ICU were rarely conscious enough to grab jewelry, and their families were usually too focused on medical crises to notice what the nurses were wearing. I drove home through Denver's evening traffic in a daze, calling my insurance company and leaving messages for my apartment manager about changing the locks, just in case. The thought that someone had been in my personal space made my skin crawl almost as much as losing the ring itself. I pulled into my parking space at the apartment complex and noticed Christina's car was gone from the visitor spot where she'd been parking it for the past week, while her own car was getting transmission work done. Inside my apartment, everything looked normal at first glance. My coffee cup from the morning was still in the sink. My throw pillows were arranged the way I'd left them. Even my bedroom looked undisturbed. But when I went to put away the small earrings I'd worn to work, I noticed the jewelry box on my dresser was closed. I always left it slightly open because the latch stuck and I was too lazy to fight with it most mornings. Now it was firmly shut. My hands trembled as I opened it, though I already knew what I wouldn't find. The small velvet tray where I kept my everyday rings was empty except for the silver band I'd inherited from my aunt. But it wasn't just the empty space that made my blood run cold. It was the way everything else was arranged, slightly off from how I'd left it, as if someone had been looking through everything and tried to put it back exactly as they'd found it. I sank onto my bed, staring at the jewelry box and finally allowing myself to think the unthinkable. Christina had a key. Christina was always short on money. Christina had been asking increasingly desperate questions about my finances lately, questions I'd brushed off because I thought she was just being nosy. And Christina knew exactly how much that ring was worth because I'd stupidly told her when Marcus first proposed, mentioning that the insurance appraisal had come back at $15,000. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My own sister had stolen my engagement ring while I was at work, saving lives and trusting that my home was safe because family wouldn't betray family. I picked up my phone to call her, then set it down again. What was I going to say? Did you steal my ring? She'd deny it, probably with the same wounded innocence she'd used to get out of trouble our entire lives. I needed proof before I made any accusations that could tear our family apart. Instead, I called my mother, keeping my voice as steady as possible while I explained that my ring was missing, and asked if she knew anything about Christina's recent financial situation. The silence on the other end of the line stretched too long. "Vanessa, honey," Mom finally said, her voice heavy with something that sounded like resignation. "Christina came by earlier today, very upset about some bills. She said she needed to sell some of her grandmother's jewelry to make ends meet." I assumed she meant jewelry from Dad's mother, you know, the pearls and things she inherited. My grandmother's jewelry. Christina had told our mother she was selling our grandmother's jewelry, probably to establish a cover story for having expensive items to sell. The calculation of it made me feel sick. This wasn't a desperate moment of weakness, this was premeditated theft with a built-in alibi. Did she say which pieces she was selling? I asked, though I already knew the answer would be vague enough to cover whatever story she needed to tell later. She was pretty upset, sweetheart. Something about needing money for car repairs and not wanting to ask the family for help again. You know how proud she can be. Proud. That was one way to describe someone who would rather steal from her sister than admit she had a problem. I thanked my mother and hung up, then sat in my empty apartment, staring at my bare ring finger and trying to decide what to do next. I could call the police, but what proof did I have? I could confront Christina directly, but she'd just deny everything, and probably make me feel guilty for even suggesting she'd steal from me. Or I could do what I'd learned to do in the ICU when faced with a complex medical situation, gather all the information, make a careful plan, and execute it with precision. Christina thought she was clever, thought she could manipulate the family dynamics and her reputation as the irresponsible but harmless baby sister to cover her tracks. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd stolen from someone who knew how to stay calm under pressure and think strategically about long-term consequences. I opened my laptop and started researching pawnshops in the Denver area, estate jewelry by online marketplaces where someone might try to sell a distinctive vintage sapphire ring. I created a document and began taking screenshots, building a timeline of Christina's recent behavior and financial requests. Every text message where she'd complained about money, every time she'd borrowed something and been slow to return it, every occasion when she'd been in my apartment and commented on my jewelry or furniture or electronics. The pattern that emerged made my chest tight with a different kind of pain than the panic I'd felt at losing the ring. This wasn't the first time Christina had taken something that didn't belong to her. It was just the first time she'd taken something valuable enough for me to notice immediately. How many small things had gone missing over the years that I'd attributed to my own carelessness? How many times had she helped herself to cash from my purse or borrowed items she'd never intended to return? By midnight, I had a comprehensive file of evidence, and a plan that went far beyond getting my ring back. Christina had always operated under the assumption that family would protect her from the consequences of her actions, that blood was thicker than accountability. She was about to learn that some lines shouldn't be crossed, even by sister. I closed the laptop and finally allowed myself to cry, not just for the lost ring but for the sister I'd thought I knew. The Christina I'd grown up with, the one who used to braid my hair and share secrets late at night, had been replaced by someone willing to steal the symbol of my future happiness to solve her own problems. The grief of that realization was almost worse than the anger. But grief and anger, I'd learned in my years as a nurse, could be powerful motivators when channeled correctly. They could fuel the kind of focused determination that saved lives and changed outcomes. Tomorrow I would start making phone calls. I would visit pawn shops and show them photos of my ring. I would gather evidence methodically and carefully, building an unshakable case. Christina had always been good at manipulation, at playing the victim and making others feel guilty for holding her accountable. But she'd never tried to manipulate someone who spent her days making life and death decisions under pressure, someone who knew how to separate emotion from action when it mattered most. As I finally turned off the lights and tried to sleep, I thought about Marcus's grandmother and the stories he'd told me about her strength and resilience. She'd raised 4 children during the Depression, working factory jobs and taking in laundry to make ends meet. She'd never taken anything that didn't belong to her, even when her family was hungry. The ring had been a symbol of that integrity, passed down through generations as a reminder that character mattered more than circumstances. Christina had stolen more than just a piece of jewelry. She'd stolen a piece of family history, a symbol of love and commitment that couldn't be replaced by insurance money or a similar ring from a jewelry store. But she'd also awakened something in me that had been dormant for too long, something that refused to be a victim and wouldn't let betrayal go unanswered. The last thing I remembered before finally falling asleep was the image of Christina's car pulling out of the visitor parking space that evening, and wondering if she'd driven straight to a pawn shop or if she was waiting for the weekend when more places would be open. Either way, she was about to discover that stealing from family came with a price she'd never calculated, and that sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who end up having the last word. Tomorrow would be the beginning of a different kind of shift, one where I wasn't trying to save someone's life but reclaim my own sense of justice. And unlike the unpredictable chaos of the ICU, this was one situation where I would control every variable. The next morning arrived with the kind of brittle sunshine that made everything look sharper, more defined. I woke up before my alarm, that hollow feeling in my stomach reminding me immediately that this wasn't a nightmare I could shake off with coffee and a hot shower. The bare spot on my ring finger felt foreign, like a missing tooth I couldn't stop touching with my tongue. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone and the list of pawn shops I'd compiled the night before, steeling myself for what promised to be a long and potentially heartbreaking day. My first stop was Mile High Pawn on Colfax, a place that looked exactly like what you'd expect from a shop that dealt in desperate people's treasure. The owner, a weathered man named Gary with arms covered in faded military tattoos, examined the photos I'd printed of my ring with the kind of practiced eye that had seen every sob story and scam in the book. He studied the unique setting, the specific cut of the sapphire, the intricate filigree work that marked it as a genuine piece from the 1950s. "Haven't seen this exact piece," he said, handing the photos back to me, "but I'll tell you what, hun, ring like this comes in It's not gonna sit on my shelf long. Vintage sapphires are hot right now, especially ones with this kind of craftsmanship. Someone brings this in. They're looking at maybe 4 or 5,000 cash. No questions asked, if you know what I mean. The number hit me like a slap. My ring was worth $15,000, but Christina would be lucky to get a third of that from a pawn shop. She was literally throwing away 2/3 of its value for quick cash, which told me everything I needed to know about how desperate her situation really was. I left Gary my contact information and moved on to the next shop on my list, a more upscale place called Denver Estate Buyers, that catered to people selling inherited jewelry and antiques. The woman behind the counter there, elegant and sharp-eyed, looked at my photos with immediate interest. "This is a beautiful piece," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Art Deco influence, but definitely post-war craftsmanship. The sapphire is what? Maybe 2 carats. Excellent clarity from what I can see in these photos." "It was my fiancé's grandmother's ring," I explained, watching her face for any flicker of recognition. "It was stolen from my apartment yesterday while I was at work." Her expression softened slightly but remained professional. "I'm sorry to hear. We do get people in here sometimes trying to sell pieces that aren't exactly theirs to sell. I'll keep an eye out, but you should know that if someone brings this in and has any kind of documentation, even fake papers, it becomes a lot more complicated legally." Documentation. The word sent a chill down my spine. What kind of documentation could Christina possibly have for my ring, unless she was planning to claim it was a gift, or that she'd inherited it somehow? I thanked the woman and left my information, adding her warning to the growing list of ways Christina might try to cover her tracks. By lunchtime I'd visited 8 different places, from legitimate estate buyers to sketchy cash for gold operations in strip malls. The pattern was consistent. My ring hadn't surfaced yet, but everyone agreed it was distinctive enough that they'd remember seeing it. Several shop owners mentioned that Fridays and weekends were busy times for people looking to sell jewelry, since that's when they needed quick cash for various reasons. I didn't want to think about too deeply. I grabbed a sandwich and sat in my car outside a Subway, calling in sick to work for the afternoon shift. The charge nurse was understanding when I explained I had a family emergency, though I kept the details vague. Using sick time to hunt for my stolen ring felt like another violation, another way Christina's selfish choices were rippling out to affect my responsibilities and reputation. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus asking how the search was going. I stared at the message for a long moment, trying to decide how much to tell him. He knew I suspected Christina, but I hadn't shared the full extent of my certainty, or the growing evidence I was collecting. Part of me wanted to protect him from the ugliness of family betrayal, and another part was still hoping I was wrong, that there was some other explanation for the missing ring and the suspicious coincidences. Instead of texting back, I called him. "Any luck?" he asked, his voice gentle but strained. "Not yet," I said, not quite lying. "I'm visiting all the obvious places, but it's early still. These things take time." "Vanessa," he said after a pause, "I need you to know that the ring doesn't matter as much as you do. I mean, it matters because it was my grandmother's, but if it's really gone, we'll figure something else out. We'll get married with a ring from a jewelry store, or we'll get married without rings at all. It doesn't change anything between us." The kindness in his voice made my throat tight. "I know," I managed, "but I'm not ready to give up yet." What I didn't tell him was that this had stopped being just about the ring. It was about the fact that my sister thought she could steal from me without consequences, that she'd calculated the risk and decided our family relationship was worth less than whatever debt she was trying to cover. It was about years of small betrayals and manipulations that I'd excused because she was family, because she was younger, because she was struggling. The ring was just the final straw that had broken something I hadn't even realized was barely holding together. After lunch I drove to Christina's neighborhood in Golden, an area of modest ranch houses where she'd bought her place 2 years ago with help from our parents for the down payment. I parked across the street and just sat there for a while, studying her house and trying to understand how someone who owned property could be desperate enough to steal from family. The yard was well maintained, the paint was fresh, and there was a newer model Honda in the driveway that definitely wasn't the car she'd claimed needed transmission work. My phone rang as I was sitting there, Christina's name flashing on the screen. For a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won out. Hey, I answered, keeping my voice as normal as possible. Vanessa, I was just thinking about you, Christina said, her voice bright and cheerful in a way that immediately put me on edge. How's everything going? You sounded a little stressed when I talked to Mom yesterday. The casual mention of our mother made my skin crawl. Christina was checking to see if I'd connected the dots about her visit, and the sob story about selling grandmother's jewelry. She was fishing for information while pretending to be concerned, and the manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. Just work stuff, I said, watching her house for any sign of movement. You know how the ICU can be. What about you? How are the car repairs going? Oh, that, she laughed, a sound that didn't quite ring true. Turns out it wasn't as bad as they thought, just needed a new alternator, much cheaper than I expected. Interesting, yesterday she'd needed $5,000 for transmission work. Today it was just an alternator, a repair that typically cost a few $100s at most. Either she'd found the money somewhere else, or she'd never actually needed it for car repairs in the first place. That's great, I said. Lucky break. Yeah, totally. Listen, I was thinking we should get together soon, maybe dinner this weekend. I feel like we haven't really talked in forever. The invitation made my stomach turn. Was she planning to act surprised when I mentioned the missing ring? Was she going to comfort me and help me look for it, all while knowing exactly where it was? The level of deception required to pull that off spoke to a kind of callousness I'd never suspected Christina possessed. Maybe, I said. This weekend is pretty busy with work and wedding planning stuff. Can I get back to you? Sure, of course, but Vanessa, is everything okay? You sound a little off. The fake concern in her voice was the last straw. Everything's fine, Christina. I'll talk to you later. I hung up before she could respond and sat in my car, hands shaking with anger. She absolutely knew what she'd done, and she was already planning her performance for when I discovered the ring was missing. The sister I'd grown up with, the one I'd trusted with my spare key in my private life, was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of theft and elaborate deception without a trace of genuine remorse. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Gary from Mile High Pawn. Woman just came in asking about selling a sapphire ring. Matches your description. She's here now if you want to come down. My heart stopped. I started the car and drove toward Colfax like I was responding to a code blue at the hospital. That same focused urgency that came from knowing someone's life hung in the balance. Except this time, it was my own life I was trying to save. My own sense of justice and family loyalty that was on life support. I made it to the pawn shop in 12 minutes, parking haphazardly and rushing through the front. Gary looked up from behind the counter where he was examining a piece of jewelry with a loop. She left about 5 minutes ago, he said. Young woman, brown hair, about your height. Said her name was Christina Rodriguez. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting it. Hearing her name, knowing she'd been here trying to sell my ring, made it real in a way that all my suspicions and evidence gathering hadn't quite managed. Did she have the ring with her? I asked. She had photos, Gary said, pulling out a small digital camera. Wanted to know what I'd pay for it, before she brought it in. Smart, actually. Most people just walk in with the goods and hope for the best. He showed me the photos on the camera's display, and there it was. My ring, Marcus's grandmother's ring, photographed against what looked like Christina's kitchen counter. The sapphire caught the light in a way that was achingly familiar, and I could see the tiny inscription inside the band that Marcus had shown me when he proposed. E.T., what did you tell her? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Told her I'd need to see the ring in person, but that I could probably do $4,000 cash if it was in the condition it looked in the photos. She said she'd think about it and left. $4,000. Christina was willing to destroy our relationship, betray my trust, and commit a felony for $4,000. The number felt surreal, impossibly small for the devastation it represented. If she comes back, I said, can you call me before you buy it? I have documentation that it's stolen property. Gary nodded, his expression grim. Happens more than you'd think, family members taking things that don't belong to them. Sorry you're dealing with this. I thanked him and walked back to my car on unsteady legs. The last tiny doubt I'd been harboring was gone. Christina had stolen my ring. She was actively trying to sell it, and she was planning to lie to my face about it when I eventually told her it was missing. The betrayal was complete and calculated, and it deserved a response that matched its scope. But I wasn't going to confront her yet. I wasn't going to call the police, or tell our parents, or give her any warning that I knew what she'd done. Instead, I was going to do what she'd clearly never expected. I was going to be smarter than she was. I drove home and spent the rest of the afternoon researching Christina's financial situation, with the same methodical approach I used for complex medical cases. Property records showed she'd refinanced her house 6 months ago, taking out a significant amount of equity. Credit reports, which I could access through a service I used for tenant screening when I'd briefly considered buying rental property, showed multiple missed payments and maxed out credit cards. Her social media posts painted a picture of someone living beyond her means, eating at expensive restaurants, and taking weekend trips she clearly couldn't afford. The pattern that emerged was of someone spiraling into debt, but unwilling to change her lifestyle or ask for help until the situation became truly desperate. The ring wasn't a moment of weakness or a temporary lapse in judgment. It was the latest escalation in a pattern of financial irresponsibility and poor decision-making that had been building for months. But there was something else in the records that made me sit back in my chair and stare at the screen. Christina's house, the one she'd bought with our parents' help, wasn't just her primary residence. According to the county assessor's office, it was also listed as collateral for a business loan she'd taken out 8 months ago, a loan that, according to the public records, was now in default. I cross-referenced the business name with Colorado's Secretary of State database, and found that Christina had registered an LLC for some kind of online consulting business that, as far as I could tell from her tax filings, had never generated any meaningful income. She'd essentially lied on a loan application, used her house as collateral for a business that didn't exist, and was now facing foreclosure proceedings that hadn't been filed yet, but were probably imminent. The scope of Christina's financial problems was far worse than I'd imagined. The ring wasn't going to save her house or solve her debt crisis. It was just a temporary band-aid on a situation that was already beyond repair. She was going to lose everything anyway, but she was willing to destroy our relationship for a few extra months of avoiding the inevitable. As the sun set over Denver, casting long shadows across my apartment, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible 24 hours earlier. Christina had made her choice when she stole from me. Now it was time for me to make mine. And unlike her desperate, short-sighted grab for cash, my response was going to be thorough, legal, and absolutely devastating. I opened a new document on my laptop and began typing. Not a confrontation, not an emotional appeal, but a business proposal. Because if Christina thought she could treat family relationships like financial transactions, then it was time to show her what a real transaction looked like. The first email I composed was to Helen Walsh, an attorney I'd met through the hospital's legal department, who specialized in real estate and contract law. The second was to a private investigator who'd helped a friend of mine document her ex-husband's hidden assets during their divorce. The third was to my financial advisor, asking about the process for purchasing distressed real estate. Christina had taught me something valuable, even if she hadn't meant to. She'd shown me that blood wasn't thicker than betrayal, that family loyalty had limits, and that sometimes the people closest to you were the ones most willing to take advantage of your trust. But she'd also underestimated exactly who she was dealing with. I wasn't the naive sister who would cry and forgive, and pretend nothing had happened. I was someone who made life and death decisions under pressure, who knew how to gather information methodically, and execute complex plans without letting emotion cloud my judgment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And I was about to give Christina the education of her lifetime about consequences, accountability, and what happened when you stole from the wrong person. The ring was just the beginning. Before this was over, Christina was going to learn that some betrayals came with a price that far exceeded whatever temporary relief she thought she was buying herself. And unlike her panicked, destructive choices, my response was going to be perfectly legal, completely justified, and absolutely final. Helen Walsh's law office occupied the 15th floor of a sleek downtown building that smelled like expensive leather and ambition. I sat across from her mahogany desk the following Monday morning, watching her review the documents I'd compiled over the weekend with the kind of sharp attention that justified her reputation as one of Denver's most effective real estate attorneys. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a way that suggested she had neither time nor patience for elaborate styling. "This is quite thorough," she said, looking up from the stack of papers. "You've essentially built a complete financial profile of your sister's situation. The foreclosure proceedings haven't been filed yet, but based on these loan documents and payment history, I'd say the bank is probably waiting until after the holidays to begin the process. Bad optics to foreclose on family homes in December." I nodded, keeping my hands folded in my lap to hide their slight trembling. "What I want to know is whether there's a way to position myself to purchase the property when it goes to auction, legally above board, but ahead of other potential buyers." Helen leaned back in her chair, studying me with the kind of look that suggested she'd seen plenty of family drama play out in real estate transactions. "There are several approaches. The most straightforward would be to contact the bank directly and express interest in purchasing the debt. Banks often prefer to avoid the auction process if they can get a reasonable offer from a qualified buyer. It saves them time, legal fees, and the uncertainty of public auction, and that would give me ownership of the house. It would give you the right to foreclose on the property, yet your sister would have a brief redemption period, where she could pay off the full debt to reclaim the house. But given what you've shown me about her financial situation, that seems unlikely." The coldness of the legal language felt appropriate. Christina had reduced our relationship to a financial transaction when she stole from me. Now I was simply responding in kind, using the same calculating approach she'd employed when she decided my engagement ring was worth sacrificing our bond as sisters. "There's another option," Helen continued, "though it's more complex. If you can demonstrate that your sister obtained the loan through fraudulent means, you might have grounds to challenge the legitimacy of the debt itself. These business loan documents suggest she may have misrepresented her income and the viability of her LLC. I thought about the consulting business that existed only on paper, the inflated revenue projections Christina had submitted to secure a loan she'd never intended to repay. What would that process look like? Expensive and time-consuming, but potentially very effective. We'd need to hire a forensic accountant to document the discrepancies between her loan application and her actual business activity. If we can prove deliberate fraud, the bank might be willing to void the loan entirely rather than risk the publicity of having approved a fraudulent application. The idea of exposing Christina's deception to that degree felt both satisfying and terrifying. It would be thorough, final, and completely devastating to any hope of maintaining a relationship with her. But then I thought about her voice on the phone, bright and cheerful as she asked about dinner plans, while my ring sat in her house, waiting to be sold to the highest bidder. "Let me think about it," I said. "In the meantime, I'd like you to reach out to the bank about purchasing the debt directly, quietly without mentioning any family connection." Helen nodded, making notes in her legal pad. "I'll need you to get pre-approved for a loan to purchase the property. The amount would be roughly what your sister owes on the mortgage, plus the business loan, probably around $300,000 total. Can you handle that financially?" I'd run the numbers over the weekend. Between my savings, my excellent credit score, and the equity in my own apartment, I could qualify for the loan. It would stretch my finances thin for a while, but I made good money as a senior ICU nurse, and I'd been careful with my spending for years. Ironically, Christina's reckless financial behavior was about to benefit me directly. "I can make it work," I said. "Good. I'll start making inquiries this week. One thing to keep in mind, Vanessa, once we start this process, it's going to be very difficult to stop. Your sister will find out eventually that someone is moving to purchase her debt, and it won't take long for her to figure out who's behind it. Are you prepared for that conversation?" I thought about Christina's face in Gary's photos, carefully staging shots of my stolen ring to get the best possible price. I thought about her cheerful voice asking about dinner plans, while she actively betrayed me. I thought about years of small manipulations and borrowed money that never got repaid, all building toward this moment when she'd decided that my happiness was worth less than her convenience. I'm prepared. After leaving Helen's office, I drove to the address the private investigator, Tom Morrison, had given me for our afternoon meeting. His office was in a strip mall in Thornton, sandwiched between a tax preparation service and a shop that repaired cell phones. It wasn't glamorous, but Tom came highly recommended from my friend Rachel, who'd used his services to document her ex-husband's hidden assets during their messy divorce. Tom looked like a retired cop, which it turned out he was. 23 years with Denver PD, before starting his own investigation business 5 years ago. His office walls were covered with certificates and commendations, and his handshake was firm without being showy. Rachel told me you're dealing with some family theft, he said, settling behind a desk that had seen better decades. Always tough when it's someone close to you. What exactly are you looking to document? I handed him a folder containing everything I'd compiled about Christina's theft of my ring. Photos of the ring, documentation of its value, the timeline of when it went missing, screenshots of Gary's texts confirming Christina had tried to sell it. I need proof that she stole this, proof that she's actively trying to sell it, and documentation of her attempts to cover her tracks. Tom flipped through the materials, his expression growing more serious as he read. This is pretty solid already. What else are you hoping to find? I want to know if this is part of a pattern, if she's stolen from other family members, other friends, if she's committed any other crimes to try to solve her money problems. I want a complete picture of who my sister really is. Tom leaned back in his chair. Consider. That kind of investigation takes time and costs money. We're talking about surveillance, background checks, possibly interviewing people who know her. Could run you $3,000 to $5,000 depending on how deep we go. $5,000, almost exactly what Christina had hoped to get by selling my ring. The symmetry felt appropriate. How long would it take? Couple of weeks for a thorough investigation. I can start with public records, social media analysis, credit history, then move to interviewing people if we find leads worth pursuing. I thought about my conversation with Helen, about the legal machinery I was setting in motion to purchase Christina's debt and foreclose on her house. Having a complete picture of her deceptions would strengthen any legal action I might need to take, and it would help me understand exactly who I was dealing with. Do it, I said, writing him a check for the retainer. That evening, I sat in my apartment with takeout Thai food growing cold beside my laptop, staring at an email from Marcus that I'd been avoiding for hours. He'd sent photos from his visit to his grandmother's jewelry box, looking for other pieces that might work as a temporary engagement ring, until we found mine or bought a replacement. The photos showed delicate pieces from the 1940s and 50s, beautiful in their own right, but nothing that could replace the specific ring his grandmother had chosen for her own engagement. None of these feel right, he'd written. They're lovely, but they're not the ring. I keep thinking we should wait, see if yours turns up before we start shopping for alternatives. His optimism was both heartbreaking and frustrating. He still believed my ring might turn up, that this was some kind of misunderstanding or accident that would resolve itself with time and patience. He didn't know about Christina's betrayal, about the calculated nature of the theft, about the larger web of deception I was uncovering, and I wasn't sure how to tell him without sounding like I'd lost my mind or become obsessed with revenge. Instead, I called him. Hey, how was your day? I asked, settling onto my couch with the phone pressed to my ear. Long meetings, boring budget review, the usual excitement of hospital administration, he said. I could hear the smile in his voice, could picture him loosening his tie in his own apartment across town. How about you? Any progress on the ring situation? Some, I said carefully. I'm working with some professionals to help track it down. It might take a while, but I'm optimistic. It wasn't exactly a lie. I was working with professionals, and I was optimistic that I'd recover the ring and get justice for Christina's betrayal. I just wasn't sharing the specific nature of the justice I had in mind. That's good, Marcus said. I was thinking, maybe we should start planning other parts of the wedding. Save the dates, book the venue, that kind of thing. The ring situation will resolve itself one way or another, but we don't have to put our whole life on hold while we wait. His practical approach to the situation made me feel guilty for the elaborate schemes I was putting into motion. Marcus was ready to move forward, to focus on our future together instead of dwelling on what had been taken from us, but I couldn't let go that easily. Christina had stolen more than just a ring. She'd shattered my trust in family, my belief that blood relationships came with certain basic guarantees of loyalty and respect. "You're right," I said. "We should keep moving forward with the planning." We talked for another hour about venues and dates and guest lists, normal conversations that felt surreal given what I'd spent the day doing. When we finally hung up, I felt like I was living two separate lives. In one, I was a bride-to-be planning a wedding with the man I loved. In the other, I was systematically destroying my sister's life in response to her betrayal. The next morning brought a text from Christina that made my blood pressure spike immediately. "Hey sis, found some of Grandma's old jewelry I want to sell. Want to come over tonight and see if there's anything you'd like to keep before I take it to a dealer." The audacity of it took my breath away. She was actually inviting me over to watch her prepare to sell stolen property, probably planning to slip my ring into the mix and claim it had been in with our grandmother's thing. The manipulation was so transparent, so insulting to my intelligence, that I had to set the phone down and walk around my apartment twice before I could trust myself to respond. "Can't tonight," I texted back. "Work stuff, maybe this weekend." Her response came immediately. "Sure, no rush, just thought you might want first dibs on anything sentimental." Sentimental? She was planning to use sentiment and family loyalty to cover her theft, to make me complicit in her crime by having me present when she discovered my ring among our grandmother's possessions. The level of calculation required to devise such a plan spoke to a kind of sociopathic manipulation I'd never suspected Christina possessed. I forwarded the text exchange to Tom Morrison with a note, asking him to prioritize surveillance of Christina's activities over the next few days. If she was planning to stage some kind of discovery of my ring, I wanted it documented from every possible angle. The call from Helen came that afternoon while I was between patients at the hospital. "Good news," she said. "The bank is very interested in discussing a sale of your sister's debt. Apparently they've been trying to work with her for months, and she's been unresponsive to their attempts at loan modification. They'd much rather sell the debt to a private party than go through the foreclosure process." "What's the timeline?" I asked, stepping into an empty conference room for privacy. "They want to meet next week to discuss terms. If we can reach an agreement, the sale could be finalized within 30 days. Your sister would be notified that the debt has been transferred, but the bank isn't required to disclose the identity of the new debt holder unless she specifically asks. 30 days. In 30 days, I could own the debt on Christina's house, could begin foreclosure proceedings against my own sister." The speed of it was both thrilling and terrifying. I'd expected this process to take months, but Christina's complete lack of communication with her lender had expedited everything. "There's one more thing," Helen continued. "I had my assistant do some research on your sister's business loan application. There are some significant discrepancies between what she reported as her income and what she actually filed on her tax return. If you want to pursue the fraud angle, we have grounds for a strong case. Fraud charges would mean criminal prosecution, not just civil consequences. Christina could face jail time, not just the loss of her house." The thought of my sister in handcuffs, being processed through the criminal justice system, should have horrified me. Instead, I felt a cold satisfaction that justice might finally catch up with someone who'd spent years avoiding the consequences of her action. "Let's focus on the debt purchase for now," I said, "but keep documenting the fraud evidence in case we need it later." That evening, I sat in my car outside Christina's house again, watching her move around inside through the lit window. She looked relaxed, comfortable, probably convinced that her plan to frame my ring theft as a discovery among family heirlooms was foolproof. She had no idea that I was sitting 50 yards away, having spent the day arranging to purchase the debt that would ultimately cost her the house she was so casually enjoying. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom Morrison. "Initial surveillance complete. Subject visited 3 different pawn shops today. Same shops you identified." showed photos but didn't complete any transactions. Also made 2 stops at jewelry stores, possibly looking for a piece similar to your ring to complete the staging you suspect. The confirmation of my worst suspicions should have been shocking, but instead it felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Christina wasn't just stealing my ring, she was crafting an elaborate deception to avoid accountability, planning to gaslight me into believing I'd somehow forgotten that my ring had been among our grandmother's jewelry all along. I started the car and drove home, my mind clear and focused for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Christina had made her choices. She'd chosen theft over honesty, manipulation over accountability, and deception over family loyalty. Now it was time for her to learn that actions had consequences, and that some people couldn't be manipulated or gaslit into accepting betrayal. The documents from Helen's office sat on my kitchen table, waiting for my signature to begin the debt purchase process. The contract with Tom Morrison was already signed, setting in motion an investigation that would document every aspect of Christina's deception. And somewhere in Christina's house, my engagement ring waited to be recovered, probably sitting next to whatever fake heirloom jewelry she'd purchased to make her story believable. I signed Helen's documents with a steady hand, then photographed them and sent them back via email. Within minutes, her response confirmed that she'd begin negotiations with the bank first thing in the morning. The legal machinery was now in motion, grinding toward a conclusion that Christina couldn't manipulate or charm her way out of. For the first time since discovering my ring was missing, I felt like I was the one in control of the situation. Christina thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers, but she was about to discover that some games had rules she'd never learned. In this particular game, I held all the pieces that mattered. The family dinner invitation arrived on a Thursday morning, timed perfectly with Christina's apparent schedule for maximum manipulation. Our mother had sent a group text announcing that she was hosting Sunday dinner to celebrate Dad's promotion to department head at the engineering firm where he'd worked for 15 years. Everyone should come, the message read. It's been too long since we've all been together as a family. I stared at the text while sitting in the hospital break room, a half-eaten bagel growing stale in front of me. The timing was no coincidence. Christina had probably suggested the family gathering, knowing it would provide the perfect opportunity to stage her discovery of my ring among our grandmother's jewelry. She could act surprised, emotional even, presenting the ring as a wonderful surprise she'd found while going through old family treasures. Our parents would witness the moment, making them unwitting accomplices to her elaborate deception. My phone buzzed with a text from Christina right on schedule. So excited for Sunday dinner. I've been going through some of Grandma's old things, and I found the most amazing jewelry box hidden in the back of her closet. Can't wait to show everyone what was inside. The setup was so transparent it was almost insulting. Christina was broadcasting her intentions, probably confident that I'd never suspect my own sister of such calculated betrayal. She was counting on family loyalty, on my natural inclination to trust and forgive, on the assumption that blood relationships came with built-in protection from consequences. She was about to learn how wrong she was. I texted back a simple "looking forward to it," and immediately called Helen Walsh. The attorney answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional despite it being barely 8 in the morning. The bank accepted our offer, she said without preamble. We'll finalize the debt purchase tomorrow morning. Your sister will be notified by certified mail that her loan has been transferred to a private party, but as we discussed, they're not required to disclose your identity unless she specifically requests it. And if she does request it, then we provide it. But most people in financial distress don't ask those kinds of questions immediately. They're usually more focused on trying to negotiate payment terms or extension. I thought about Christina's complete lack of communication with her lender, her apparent belief that she could simply ignore her debts until they disappeared. What happens next? You'll officially own her debt as of Monday morning. At that point, you can begin foreclosure proceedings immediately, or you can attempt to work out a payment plan if you prefer. Given what you've told me about her financial situation and her recent behavior, I'd recommend moving quickly. Dragging this out just gives her more time to potentially damage the property or hide assets. Assets like my engagement ring, which she was planning to present as a family heirloom this weekend. How quickly can we move? Foreclosure proceedings can begin as early as next week. Colorado law requires a 30-day notice period before the actual foreclosure sale, but that notice can be served immediately once you own the debt. 30 days. Christina would have 30 days from the moment she received the foreclosure notice to come up with nearly $300,000 to save her house. Given her maxed-out credit cards and non-existent business income, it might as well have been $30 million. Do it. Start the process as soon as the debt transfer is complete. After hanging up with Helen, I called Tom Morrison. His investigation had been running for a week, and I needed to know what he'd discovered before Sunday's dinner performance. "Your sister's been busy," Tom said without pleasantry. "The surveillance turned up some interesting patterns. She's visited 7 different pawn shops and 3 jewelry stores in the past 10 days. The jewelry stores were definitely shopping for something specific, probably trying to find a piece similar to your ring. Did she buy any? 2 vintage-style rings from different stores. Nothing that matches your ring exactly, but similar enough that someone not familiar with jewelry might think they were looking at family heirlooms. She also purchased what looks like an antique jewelry box from an estate sale in Boulder." The scope of Christina's deception was breathtaking. She wasn't just planning to claim she'd found my ring, she was creating an entire staging area, complete with other discovered jewelry and an appropriately aged container to make her story believable. The level of premeditation involved transformed this from a moment of desperate theft into something approaching criminal fraud. "There's more," Tom continued. "I ran background checks on her recent associates and financial contacts. Your sister owes money to some people who aren't as patient as banks, private lenders, the kind who charge ridiculous interest rates and don't rely on legal proceedings to collect debts." My stomach dropped. How much money? Hard to say exactly, but based on what I could track through her bank records and social media activity, probably another 50 to 70,000 in private loans. The kind of people who expect payment regardless of your other financial obligations. Christina had borrowed money from loan sharks, which explained her desperate timeline for selling my ring. Banks might work with delinquent borrowers, might accept partial payments, or modified terms. Private lenders with no legal oversight had different methods of debt collection, methods that didn't involve paperwork or courtroom proceedings. Is she in physical danger? Possibly. These aren't the kind of people who break legs anymore, but they have other ways of applying pressure. Harassment, threats, damage to property or reputation. Your sister's probably been living under significant stress for months. The information should have made me feel sympathy for Christina's situation, should have explained her desperate choices and reckless behavior. Instead, it only reinforced my decision to proceed with the foreclosure. She'd made her bed with dangerous people rather than asking family for help, rather than being honest about the scope of her problem. Now she was trying to solve those problems by stealing from me, by betraying the one person who might have actually helped her if she'd been truthful. "Keep documenting everything," I told Tom. "I want a complete record of her activities leading up to this weekend." Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical November weather in Denver that matched my mood perfectly. I dressed carefully for the family dinner, choosing a simple black dress that would photograph well if Christina decided to document her discovery for social media. I also wore a small recording device Tom had provided, barely visible among my jewelry, just in case Christina's performance included admissions that might be useful later. The drive to my parents' house in Cherry Hills Village took me through neighborhoods where I'd grown up, past the elementary school where Christina and I had walked together every morning, past the park where we'd spent countless summer afternoons. The nostalgia felt bitter now, tainted by the knowledge of who my sister had become, and what she was planning to do in a few hours. My parents' house looked exactly the same as always, a red brick colonial with white shutters and a front yard that Dad maintained with obsessive precision. Christina's car was already in the driveway, along with my Uncle Robert's SUV, and my cousin Michelle's sedan, a full audience for whatever performance Christina had planned. Inside, the house smelled like pot roast, and my mother's signature apple pie, scents that usually made me feel safe and welcomed. Today they just reminded me that this might be the last family gathering where we could all pretend to be a normal, loving family. After today, everything would be different. Christina greeted me with a hug that felt like a betrayal, her arms around my shoulders while my stolen ring probably sat hidden somewhere upstairs. "Vanessa, you look great. How's work been?" "Busy," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "How about you? How's the consulting business going?" A flicker of something passed across her face, too quick to interpret. "Good. Really good. Actually just landed a big contract that should help with the cash flow situation." Another lie, delivered with the same confident smile she'd been using our entire lives. There was no consulting business, no big contract, no improvement in her cash flow situation. In fact, her situation was about to get significantly worse starting tomorrow morning. When the debt transfer became official, dinner proceeded normally, with Dad recounting stories about his promotion and the new responsibilities that came with managing a larger team. Mom bustled around serving food and making sure everyone had enough to eat. My uncle and cousin shared updates about their own lives, normal family conversation that felt surreal given what was actually happening beneath the surface. It wasn't until dessert was being served that Christina made her move. "Oh, before I forget," she said, her voice bright with manufactured excitement, "I found something amazing this week while I was cleaning out some of Grandma's old things." Here it comes, I thought, watching her carefully. The performance of a lifetime. Christina disappeared upstairs and returned carrying an ornate wooden jewelry box that looked authentically vintage, probably the one Tom had seen her purchase at the estate sale in Boulder. She set it on the dining room table with reverent care, as if it contained precious family artifacts instead of staged props. "I was going through the back of Grandma's closet, and this was hidden behind some old photo albums," she said, her voice trembling slightly with what appeared to be genuine emotion. "I think she must have forgotten about it, or maybe she was saving it for a special occasion." Our parents leaned forward with interest, and I saw my father's eyes moisten slightly at the mention of his late mother. Christina was using their grief and nostalgia as weapons, manipulating their emotions to sell her elaborate deception. She opened the jewelry box slowly, revealing an assortment of pieces that looked appropriately aged and worn. Some of them were probably genuine items from estate sales, mixed with the modern pieces she'd purchased to create a convincing collection. And there, nestled among the other items as if it had been there for decades, was my engagement ring. "Oh my goodness," Mom gasped, reaching toward the jewelry box. "I remember some of these pieces from when your grandmother was alive." Christina nodded solemnly, then picked up my ring with hands that trembled just enough to suggest overwhelming emotion. "This one is so beautiful. Look at the craftsmanship on this sapphire setting. Grandma must have worn this when she was young." The acting was flawless. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have believed every word, would have been moved by the apparent discovery of forgotten family treasure. But knowing what I knew, watching Christina hold my stolen ring while performing grief and nostalgia for our grandmother, felt like watching a sociopath at work. "Vanessa," Christina said, turning toward me with the ring held out like an offering, "you should have this. Grandma would have wanted you to wear it, especially with your engagement and everything. It's almost like she saved it specifically for you." The moment of truth. Christina was offering to give me back my own ring, stolen from my apartment and staged as a family heirloom, while our parents watched with approving smiles. She was counting on my gratitude, on my emotional response to receiving such a meaningful gift, to prevent me from looking too closely at the details, or asking uncomfortable questions. I took the ring from her outstretched hand, feeling its familiar weight and seeing the tiny inscription that proved beyond any doubt that this was Marcus's grandmother's ring, not some forgotten family heirloom. "It's beautiful," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "Thank you for finding it." I slipped the ring onto my right hand, not my left where my engagement ring belonged, and smiled at Christina with what I hoped looked like genuine appreciation. "This means so much to me. I can't wait to show Marcus." Christina's smile faltered for just a moment, probably wondering why I hadn't immediately recognized it as my engagement ring. But she recovered quickly, basking in our parents' praise for her thoughtfulness and her dedication to preserving family history. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced conversation and manufactured emotions. I played my part, thanking Christina repeatedly for her generosity, exclaiming over the other pieces in the jewelry box, helping to decide which family members should receive which items, all while wearing my own stolen ring on the wrong hand, and mentally counting down the hours until Christina's world began to collapse. As the evening wound down and family members began to leave, Christina pulled me aside in the hallway. "I'm so glad you liked the ring," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I almost kept it for myself, but I knew you'd appreciate it more. Especially with everything going on with your engagement ring disappearing." The casual mention of my disappeared engagement ring was the final straw. She was still playing the concerned sister, still pretending to care about my loss while literally wearing the evidence of her theft on my finger. The sociopathic calculation required to maintain such a performance spoke to a level of manipulation I'd never imagined Christina possessed. "You're such a good sister," I said, hugging her goodbye while the recording device captured every word. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I drove home through the dark Denver streets with my engagement ring, finally back on my finger, where it belonged. But the victory felt hollow, tainted by the knowledge of how far Christina had been willing to go to cover her theft. She'd manipulated our entire family, used their love and grief as tools in her deception, and would have let me suffer indefinitely rather than admit what she'd done. Tomorrow morning, the debt transfer would be complete. Tomorrow afternoon, Helen would file the foreclosure paperwork. And within a week, Christina would receive certified mail informing her that her house was being foreclosed on by a private lender she'd never heard of. The ring was back where it belonged, but this was far from over. Christina had taught me that blood relationships didn't guarantee loyalty or honesty, that family could be just as capable of betrayal as strangers. Now it was time to teach her that some betrayals came with consequences that couldn't be charmed away or manipulated out of existence. I parked in my apartment complex and sat in the car for a few minutes, twisting the ring on my finger and thinking about the conversation I'd need to have with Marcus. He deserved to know the truth about how I'd recovered the ring, about what his future sister-in-law was really like, about the legal proceedings I'd set in motion while he'd been patiently waiting for the situation to resolve itself. But that conversation would wait until tomorrow. Tonight, I just wanted to sit with the satisfaction of having my ring back and knowing that justice was finally catching up with someone who'd spent years believing she was immune to consequences. Christina's performance tonight had been flawless, but it was also her last. After this week, she'd never have the luxury of manipulating family dynamics or playing the victim again. The reckoning was coming, and she'd brought it entirely on herself. The phone call came at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after the family dinner. I was getting ready for my shift at the hospital when Christina's name flashed on my screen, and I could hear the panic in her voice before she even finished saying hello. "Vanessa, something terrible has happened," she said, her words tumbling over each other in a rush. "I got this certified letter yesterday from some law firm saying that my mortgage has been sold to a private lender, and now they're starting foreclosure proceedings. It doesn't make any sense. I've been trying to work something out with the bank for months." I set down my coffee cup and walked to the window, looking out at the Denver skyline while I chose my words carefully. "That sounds awful, Christina. What exactly does the letter say?" "It says I have 30 days to pay the full amount of my loans, or they'll sell the house at auction." "Vanessa, that's almost $300,000. I don't have that kind of money. I don't know what I'm gonna do." The desperation in her voice was real, probably the first genuine emotion I'd heard from her in months. But it was too late for honesty, too late for the kind of sister-to-sister conversation that might have prevented this entire situation if she'd chosen to have it before stealing from me. "Have you talked to a lawyer?" I asked. "I can't afford a lawyer. I can barely afford groceries right now." "Vanessa, I know we haven't always been close, but you're the only person I know who might understand legal stuff. Could you maybe look at these papers? Help me figure out what my options are?" The irony was staggering. Christina was asking the sister she'd stolen from to help her navigate the legal consequences of her theft, completely unaware that I was the one orchestrating those consequences. She was turning to me for help while my engagement ring sat on my finger, having been gifted to me just days earlier as a family heirloom. "Of course I'll help," I said. "Why don't you bring the papers by my apartment tonight after I get off work? We can go through them together." Relief flooded her voice. Thank you so much. I don't know what I'd do without you. You're the best sister anyone could ask for. The words felt like a slap, but I kept my voice steady. That's what family is for. After hanging up, I called Helen Walsh to confirm that everything was proceeding according to plan. The foreclosure notice had been served, the 30-day clock was ticking, and Christina had no legal recourse to stop the process, unless she could come up with the full debt amount. Has she made any attempt to contact the new lender? Helen asked. Not yet. She called me this morning asking for help understanding the legal documents. That's not unusual. Most people in this situation go through a period of denial before they start exploring their options. Just remember, Vanessa, once she finds out you're the lender, there's no going back. This will permanently destroy your relationship with your sister. I thought about Christina's performance at the family dinner, about the careful staging and emotional manipulation she'd used to give me back my own stolen property. The relationship was already destroyed. She just didn't know it yet. That evening, Christina arrived at my apartment, carrying a manila folder thick with legal documents. She looked terrible, dark circles under her eyes and a nervous energy that made her hands shake as she spread the papers across my kitchen table. The stress of her situation was finally showing, cracking the polished facade she usually maintained. This is the original loan documentation, she said, pointing to a stack of papers, and this is the notice about the debt being transferred. And this, she held up a single sheet with trembling fingers, is the foreclosure notice. I examined the documents with the careful attention they deserved, though I'd already reviewed identical copies in Helen's office. The foreclosure notice lists the new lender as Rocky Mountain Asset Management, I said. Have you tried contacting them to discuss payment options? I called the number on the letter, but they just said I needed to speak with their attorney. When I called the attorney, they said all communication had to be in writing. It's like they don't want to work with me at all, because they don't. Because Rocky Mountain Asset Management was a limited liability company I'd created specifically for this transaction, and their attorney was Helen Walsh, who was following my instructions to proceed with foreclosure as quickly as possible. Christina, I said, sitting down across from her at the table, I need you to be completely honest with me about your financial situation. How did things get this bad? For a moment, she looked like she might tell the truth. Her eyes filled with tears, and her carefully constructed defenses seemed to waver, but then she gathered herself, straightened her shoulders, and launched into the same story she'd been telling our family for months. The consulting business has been slower than expected, she said, and then my car needed major repairs, and I had some unexpected medical bills. You know how it is, things just pile up. I thought I could get caught up once a few big contracts came through, but the timing just didn't work out. Every word was a lie, and we both knew it. Christina's consulting business existed only on paper. Her car repairs had been a fabrication to explain her need for money, and her medical bills were non-existent. She was still lying, still manipulating, even as her world collapsed around her. What about the jewelry you found in Grandma's things? I asked, watching her face carefully. Some of those pieces looked valuable. Maybe you could sell them to help with the debt. Christina's face went pale. I already looked into that. Most of it isn't worth as much as it looked. Costume jewelry, mostly. The antique ring I gave you was probably the most valuable piece, and you should keep that. It belongs in the family. She was trapped by her own deception. Having presented my stolen ring as a family heirloom, she couldn't now suggest selling it without revealing that she'd lied about finding it among our grandmother's possessions. The web of lies she'd constructed was beginning to strangle her. Christina, I said, my voice gentle but firm, I think there are some things you're not telling me. If I'm going to help you, I need to know the whole truth. For a long moment, she stared at the foreclosure notice, her hands clenched into fists on the table. When she finally looked up, there was something desperate in her eyes, something that might have been the beginning of honesty. I made some mistakes, she admitted. Borrowed money from people I shouldn't have borrowed from, promised things I couldn't deliver. I thought I could fix it all before anyone found out, but everything went wrong at once. It was the closest thing to truth I'd heard from her in months, but it was still just the surface of her deception. She wasn't ready to admit the theft, wasn't prepared to face the full scope of what she'd done. How much money are we talking about? I asked. Enough that these people don't wait for legal proceedings. she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Enough that I'm scared to be alone in my house at night. The admission of fear felt genuine, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered her cheerful voice on the phone last week, asking about dinner plans, while my ring sat hidden in her house. I remembered the elaborate performance at family dinner, the way she'd manipulated our parents' emotions to sell her deception. Why didn't you come to family for help before it got this bad? I asked. Christina laughed bitterly, because I knew what everyone would say, that I was irresponsible, that I should have known better, that I needed to face the consequences of my choices. No one would have helped. They would have just lectured me about financial responsibility and told me to figure it out myself. The statement revealed everything about how Christina saw our family relationships. She viewed love and support as conditional, based on maintaining a perfect image rather than being honest about struggles and mistakes. She'd chosen deception and theft over vulnerability, manipulation over trust. You don't know that, I said. You never gave anyone the chance to help because you never told the truth about what was happening. And now it's too late anyway, she said, gathering up the papers with shaking hands. I have 30 days to come up with $300,000, or I lose everything. Unless you know someone with that kind of money, who'd be willing to loan it to a financial disaster like me. The opening was perfect, so obvious that I almost thought she was setting me up somehow. But her desperation was real. Her panic genuine. She was grasping at any possible solution, no matter how unlikely. Actually, I said carefully, I might know someone who could help. Christina's head snapped up, hope flickering in her eyes. Really? Who? A friend who invests in real estate. She sometimes buys distressed properties, works out payment plans with the owners. It's not charity, it's business. But it might be an option. Oh my God, Vanessa. That would be amazing. Could you call her? Could you set up a meeting? I could arrange something, I said. But Christina, this person would need complete financial transparency. No lies, no hidden debts, no surprises. If you're not ready to be completely honest about everything, this won't work. I'll tell her everything, Christina promised quickly. Whatever she needs to know. Bank records, credit reports, loan documents. Anything, even the illegal loans, the people you're afraid of? Christina's face went white again, but she nodded. Even those. If she can help me save my house, I'll tell her whatever she wants to know. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, finally stopping at Helen Walsh's number. Let me see if she's available to meet this week. The call was brief, professional. Helen played her part perfectly, agreeing to meet with Christina on Friday afternoon, to discuss the possibility of purchasing her debt and working out a payment arrangement. We scheduled the meeting for Helen's office downtown, neutral territory where Christina would feel comfortable discussing her situation. After Christina left that night, clutching the meeting information like a lifeline, I sat in my apartment and tried to process what I was feeling. There was satisfaction in knowing that justice was finally catching up with someone who'd spent years avoiding consequences. But there was also a hollow sadness, a grief for the sister I'd thought I knew, and the relationship that was about to be destroyed forever. Friday afternoon arrived gray and cold, with snow flurries that reminded everyone that winter was coming, whether they were ready or not. I sat in Helen's waiting room, having arrived early to review our strategy one final time. The plan was simple: let Christina present her case, let her admit to the illegal loans and the desperate measures she'd taken, and then reveal that the mysterious investor she'd been hoping would save her was actually the sister she'd stolen from. Christina arrived exactly on time, dressed in her best business attire and carrying a folder full of financial documents. She looked nervous but hopeful, probably convinced that this meeting represented her last chance at salvation. She had no idea that her salvation and her destruction were the same person. Helen's conference room was elegant and intimidating, designed to make clients feel like they were in the presence of serious legal expertise. Christina sat across from Helen's desk while I positioned myself slightly behind and to the side, close enough to observe but not immediately threatening. Ms. Rodriguez, Helen began, I understand you're facing foreclosure and looking for alternative financing options. Why don't you start by explaining your current situation? For the next 20 minutes, Christina laid out her financial problems with a level of honesty I'd never heard from her before. She admitted to the fraudulent business loan, acknowledged the illegal private loans that had pushed her into truly dangerous territory, and even confessed to some smaller deceptions involving credit cards and personal loans from friends. But she didn't mention the ring. Even facing the loss of everything, even begging for help from a stranger, she couldn't bring herself to admit that she'd stolen from her own sister. Is that everything? Helen asked when Christina finished her presentation. No other debts or obligations we should know about? That's everything, Christina said firmly. I know it's a mess, but I'm committed to making it right. I just need someone who's willing to work with me instead of just foreclosing immediately. Helen looked at me, a question in her eye. I nodded slightly, and she opened a different folder on her desk. Ms. Rodriguez, Helen said, before we discuss any potential arrangement, there's something you should know. The company that purchased your debt, Rocky Mountain Asset Management, is owned by someone you know. Christina frowned, confused. I don't understand. I don't know anyone in real estate investment. Actually, you do. Helen turned her computer monitor so Christina could see the screen, displaying the LLC registration documents with my name listed as the sole owner. Rocky Mountain Asset Management is owned by your sister, Vanessa Rodriguez. The color drained from Christina's face as she processed the information. She turned to look at me, her eyes wide with shock and growing comprehension. Vanessa, you bought my mortgage? I bought your debt, I corrected, standing up and moving to the chair directly across from her. All of it, the mortgage, the business loan, everything the bank was willing to sell. But why? I don't understand. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small digital recording device, the same one Tom Morrison had provided for documenting evidence. Because 3 weeks ago, you stole my engagement ring from my apartment while I was at work saving law, and then you had the audacity to give it back to me at family dinner, pretending you'd found it among Grandma's jewelry. Christina's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish pulled from water. The careful facade she'd maintained throughout the meeting crumbled completely, leaving behind someone who looked younger and more frightened than I'd seen her since childhood. I don't know what you're talking about, she whispered, but the lie sounded hollow even to her. I pressed play on the recording device, and Christina's voice filled the conference room, her conversation with Gary at the pawn shop, her phone calls to other jewelry buyers, her text messages about needing money quickly, evidence of her theft, her deception, and her elaborate plan to cover her tracks. The ring is back where it belongs, I said, holding up my left hand so she could see the sapphire catching the light. But that doesn't erase what you did. It doesn't undo the betrayal or the lies, or the way you manipulated our entire family to cover your theft. Christina stared at the ring, then at the recording device, then at my face. Finally, she found her voice. Vanessa, I'm sorry, I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. You could have asked for help. You could have told the truth about your situation instead of lying to everyone who cared about you. You could have done literally anything except steal from your own sister. I was going to pay you back, she said, tears streaming down her face. Once I sold the ring, I was going to buy you a replacement. You never would have known, but you didn't sell it to pay back your debts. I said you were planning to use that money to buy yourself more time, to continue living the same irresponsible lifestyle that got you into this mess in the first place, and when the money ran out, you would have found someone else to steal from. Christina's shoulders shook with silent sobs, but I felt nothing except a cold satisfaction that the truth was finally being spoken aloud. Helen sat quietly, taking notes for the legal record we would need if Christina tried to challenge the foreclosure. What happens now? Christina asked, her voice broken. Now you have two choices, I said. You can pay off the full debt within the next 3 weeks, which we both know you can't do, or you can lose the house at foreclosure auction. And then what? I'll be homeless. I'll have nothing. Then you'll be exactly where you put yourself through your own choices. The difference is that now you'll face the consequences instead of passing them on to someone else. Christina looked desperately at Helen, as if the attorney might offer some kind of salvation. Isn't there some kind of payment plan or modification? Helen shook her head. Your sister has been very clear about her intentions. She wants full payment or foreclosure. Given the documented theft and deception, I'd say those terms are generous. Generous? Christina's voice cracked. She's destroying my life over a ring. No, I said, standing up and gathering my purse. You destroyed your own life. I'm just making sure you finally face the consequences. I walked toward the conference room door, then stopped and turned back. By the way, Christina, if you're thinking about claiming the ring was a gift, or that you found it legitimately, you should know that I've documented everything. The theft, the staging, the lies to our family. If you try to challenge any of this legally, I'll file criminal charges for theft and fraud. Christina's face went completely white. Criminal charges would mean jail time, not just the loss of her house. Vanessa, please, I'm your sister. My sister wouldn't have stolen from me, I said. My sister wouldn't have lied to our parents. My sister wouldn't have tried to gaslight me into believing I'd lost my own engagement ring. I don't know who you are, but you're not my sister. I left Christina sitting in Helen's conference room, probably beginning to understand for the first time that actions had consequences, and that some betrayals couldn't be forgiven or forgotten. The foreclosure would proceed as scheduled, her house would be sold at auction, and she'd finally face the reality of her choices without being able to manipulate her way out of them. 3 weeks later, I stood on the steps of the county courthouse, watching the foreclosure auction of Christina's house. She wasn't there to witness it, having apparently left Denver shortly after our meeting in Helen's office. The house sold for less than the debt amount, which meant I took a financial loss on the transaction, but it wasn't about the money, it was about justice, accountability, and making sure that someone who'd spent years avoiding consequences finally faced them. Marcus squeezed my hand as the auctioneer's gavel fell, officially transferring ownership of Christina's house to the highest bidder. Are you okay? He asked. I'm fine, I said, and for the first time in months I actually meant it. The ring was back on my finger where it belonged. The sister who'd betrayed me was gone from my life, leaving space for relationships built on honesty instead of manipulation. And I'd learned something valuable about my own strength, my own ability to fight for justice even when it came at a personal cost. Ready to go home? Marcus asked. I looked at my engagement ring one last time, thinking about Marcus's grandmother and the strength she'd shown throughout her life. The ring had survived World War II, the Great Depression, and decades of family history. It had survived Christina's betrayal too, and it would continue to symbolize love and commitment, long after the pain of this situation faded. I'm ready, I said, and we walked away from the courthouse together, toward a future built on truth instead of lies, trust instead of manipulation, and love that didn't require stealing from others to survive. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we trust completely, but sometimes, if we're strong enough to fight back, we discover that we're capable of more than we ever imagined. Christina taught me that family loyalty has limits, but she also taught me that I was strong enough to enforce those limits when necessary. The ring was just a ring, but what it represented, what I'd fought to protect and recover, was worth every difficult choice I'd made along the way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.